It is late 1943. The war in Europe is evolving from a German blitzkrieg spectacle into a grinding, brutal siege. The tide is turning, but the High Command understands that victory will not be secured by sheer industrial might alone. It requires a surgical edge, a sliver of knowledge, a ghost in the machine. This story begins not on the fiery battlefields of the Eastern Front or the perilous depths of the U-boat-infested Atlantic, but in a quiet, forgotten corner of America, a dusty farm in Montana. Here, among the endless wheat fields and the vast, unblemished sky, lived two brothers, Ethan and Samuel Vance. Their lives were dictated by the rhythm of the seasons, the reliability of a stubborn tractor, and the shared, unspoken language of men who had worked the land since childhood. They were anonymous, unremarkable, save for one crucial inherent quality, a terrifying mastery of navigation and survival, honed over years of tracking animals and fixing machinery miles from civilization. They were mechanics by nature, pilots by necessity. They understood how machines failed and how men broke. And the military, in its ceaseless, desperate search for assets, somehow found them. The mission, when it was finally briefed, sounded like a poorly conceived joke. The Germans, anticipating the inevitable Allied landing, had begun a massive, clandestine effort to fortify the most impenetrable terrain in Europe, the rugged, cloud-shrouded peaks of the Bavarian and Austrian Alps. Intelligence suggested the construction of secret high-altitude radar stations, and perhaps even worse, hidden caches of jet engine prototypes that could fundamentally alter the aerial balance of power. The Allies needed eyes on the ground, or rather just above it, where no standard reconnaissance could penetrate undetected. Enter the Vance brothers and their designated weapon, a highly modified, stripped-down Lockheed P-38 Lightning, codenamed Ghostbird. The standard P-38 was a proven, fearsome fighter. The Ghostbird, however, was something else entirely. Its armament was removed, replaced by an array of experimental, high-resolution cameras and specialized surveillance gear. Its fuel tanks were augmented to the bursting point, giving it the endurance of a bomber, but retaining the profile of a nimble fighter. It was built for speed, altitude, and silence. A mechanical whisper designed to fly higher than the Messerschmitts, faster than the Flak. The irony was palpable. Two farm boys who had only recently seen the ocean were now tasked with the most sophisticated, high-stakes reconnaissance mission in the most heavily defended airspace in the world. Their initial reaction, recorded in a single surviving letter, was sheer disbelief. As one high-ranking general later remarked, "We were sending two men to steal the secrets of an empire. On paper, it was suicide by reconnaissance." The core objective was to fly 3 independent deep penetration missions over a 48-hour period, identifying and mapping 4 specific sites that analysts believed housed the crucial technical secrets. Failure meant the loss of the war's element of surprise. Success meant saving thousands of lives during the eventual ground invasion. The stakes could not have been higher. And yet, the operational briefing was unsettlingly brief. "You are ghosts," they were told. "If you are seen, we don't know you." The brothers arrived at a desolate, secret airfield in southern Italy. The air crackled with a mix of anticipation and dread. Technicians treated the Ghostbird with the reverence one reserves for a sacred, fragile artifact. Ethan, the older and more stoic of the two, walked the length of the plane, running a calloused hand over the smooth, cold metal skin. He wasn't thinking about the Reich or the Führer. He was calculating the sheer physics of the flight, the density of the air at 35,000 feet, the burn rate of the fuel, the precise angle of attack required to avoid icing on the wingtips. He was the engineer. Samuel, the younger brother, was the navigator, the emotional compass. He looked up at the moonless sky, which would soon be their hunting ground. He remembered the vast darkness over their farm, the way the stars looked so close you could almost touch them. Now that darkness held not silent promise, but the very real threat of 20mm cannon fire. The contrast between the simple, honest danger of a broken harvest and the existential terror of modern aerial combat was stark. The stage was set for a story that would defy the cold arithmetic of war. 2 lives against the industrial military might of the Third Reich. The official records, naturally, predicted a grim, swift end to the mission. What the strategists failed to account for was the unique, quiet resilience of the men from the plains. The men who knew how to survive when the odds were stacked impossibly high. This is just the beginning of a true story of daring, technology, and ultimate survival that shocked the Allied High Command. To follow Ethan and Samuel into the storm over the Alps and learn the secret of their success, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We have 7 chapters of history waiting to be uncovered. The night was a heavy, suffocating blanket over the Italian airstrip. The air smelled of high-octane fuel and cold sweat. Ethan and Samuel strapped themselves into the twin cockpits of the P-38, the Ghost Bird. The physical size of the aircraft belied its delicate nature. Every ounce of excess weight had been shaved, every system meticulously tuned. The engineers had stripped away the machine's ability to fight, leaving only its capacity to flee and observe. It was a racehorse transformed into a highly specialized spy, fast, fragile, and utterly dependent on the skill of its riders. Their mission hinged on 2 factors: the element of surprise, which would be lost the moment they crossed the German defensive perimeter, and the brothers' innate understanding of machinery under stress. Flying the Ghost Bird was not like maneuvering a conventional fighter. At the operational altitude of 37,000 feet, the air was thin, the controls sluggish, and the danger of engine failure due to the complex turbo superchargers was paramount. One wrong manifold setting, one moment of hesitation, and the thin ribbon of cold air supporting them would vanish. Ethan, the pilot, ran through the pre-flight checks, his voice a low, steady rumble over the intercom. He had the detached focus of a man analyzing a complex mechanical problem, not a life-or-death situation. Fuel flow nominal. Turbos spooling. We're running lean, Sammy. Gotta conserve every drop. Samuel, in the adjacent pod, confirmed the camera systems. Cams armed, heat sensors active. We're ready to take their picture, Ethan. Just get us close enough. His tone was lighter, a necessary ballast to his brother's intensity. But beneath the bravado, he felt the cold dread common to all air crews facing a deep penetration mission. German fighter defenses were layered, professional and merciless. The takeoff was uneventful, a heavy, rapid ascent into the black. As they climbed, the world shrank. Italy, then the Mediterranean, disappeared under a blanket of high cloud cover. The only way forward was the compass, the star charts, and the meticulously calculated flight path over the towering, jagged spine of the Alps. The mountains themselves were the first enemy, unforgiving and indifferent. Altitude 35,000, oxygen flow check, Ethan murmured. The cold inside the cockpit was aggressive, penetrating the heavy flight gear. Every breath was a thin, controlled sip of pressurized gas. At this altitude, a single failure of the oxygen system meant unconsciousness in less than a minute. They were flying in the dead zone, where man was not meant to survive without technological intervention. The Ghost Bird crossed into German-occupied airspace precisely at the designated time, 4 hours into the flight. The moment they did, the static in their headphones thickened. German ground control radar had picked up their presence, not their identity, not their precise trajectory, but the ghost of an echo at extreme range. The Luftwaffe was alerted. The brothers, however, had anticipated this. Their mission profile included flying a convoluted route designed to mimic a high-altitude weather reconnaissance flight, but the Luftwaffe was not easily fooled. Within minutes, the chilling, methodical tone of a German voice cut through the static, relaying a vector to a fighter scramble. "They're sending up the birds, Sammy. 2 bogies, ascending fast," Ethan reported, his eyes fixed on the distant, glittering pinpricks of light that could only be 2 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, likely a high-altitude variant. The standard Luftwaffe doctrine dictated a swift vertical interception. They expected a heavy bomber or an unarmed Spitfire. What they did not expect was the sheer velocity of the Ghost Bird, which, stripped of its weight, could maintain a cruising speed few fighters could sustain in a climb. This was where the farm boys' engineering background paid off. They knew the precise, narrow performance envelope of the P-38. Ethan pushed the plane to its limits, coaxing every possible knot of speed from the twin Allisons. He knew that engaging in a turning fight was suicide. His strategy was pure physics: fly faster, fly higher, and exploit the enemy's expectation. 100 meters difference, Ethan. They're closing, Samuel warned, consulting the rudimentary radar display. In a desperate, calculated move, Ethan executed a shallow, high-speed dive, not towards the ground but towards the jagged peaks. He dropped 1,000 feet in seconds, then pulled back, using the momentum to slingshot the P-38 into a brutal, oxygen-starved climb above 40,000 feet. The maneuver was dangerous, risking structural integrity and causing temporary nauseating greyouts. The German pilots, trained in standard dogfighting maneuvers, were caught completely off guard. They had anticipated a climb or a turn, not a vertical energy trap. As their Messerschmitts struggled to follow the abrupt change in altitude, their superchargers choked in the thin air, momentarily robbing them of speed and altitude advantage. The Ghostbird, already tuned for this extreme environment, surged ahead. What the Germans didn't know was that the Vance brothers had practiced this very maneuver, a high-G, high-altitude break, countless times over the uninhabited mountains of Montana. It wasn't standard military doctrine. It was the intuitive mechanical mastery of two men who understood the limits of their machine and the thin, invisible line between engineering success and catastrophic failure. They had just used the high atmosphere as a weapon. The initial interception attempt failed. The Messerschmitts fell back, sputtering, their pilots frustrated and confused by the phantom that moved with an impossible blend of speed and altitude. Ethan leveled off, heart pounding, but his voice remained steady. "Targets approaching, Sammy. 10 minutes to initial sight. Get ready to shoot." The physical battle was paused, replaced by the strategic one. They had evaded the hunter, but now they had to execute the steal. The clock was ticking and they were already living on borrowed time. The real danger, the critical objective hidden within the impenetrable German defenses, was just ahead. The Ghostbird, having temporarily shaken its pursuers, now flew in a terrifying silence. The only sound was the insistent roar of the powerful Allison engines and the occasional shudder of the airframe protesting the extreme altitude. Below them, the sprawling white-capped fortress of the Alps seemed to merge with the pre-dawn sky, a landscape of overwhelming, terrifying beauty. Samuel, the reconnaissance specialist, prepared the cameras. The target was Site A, a suspected underground facility located deep within a major mountain range, camouflaged with extraordinary diligence. Previous intelligence suggested it was the key hub for the development of Germany's Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons, radar technology. The Allies needed visual confirmation, not just of its presence, but of its layout, its defenses, and the type of construction that would hint at its purpose. "We need 3 passes, Ethan. High oblique, low oblique, and a direct vertical. 30 seconds window for each," Samuel dictated, his eyes glued to the optical targeting scope. He was running a mental calculation of speed, angle, and the minuscule distortion caused by the air density. This wasn't photography. It was applied geometry at 400 miles per hour. Ethan initiated the first, cautious pass. He dropped the Ghostbird to 30,000 feet, risking a closer proximity to ground-based radar, but necessary for the high-resolution shot. As they swept over the mountain peak, Samuel triggered the sequential cameras. The shutter noise, amplified in the quiet cockpit, sounded like rapid-fire drumming. Then, the warning flared. A dense network of flak, anti-aircraft artillery, suddenly appeared on their radar display. A deadly, unanticipated curtain of defense. This was no mere supply depot. This was a fortress. The German engineers had integrated the mountain's natural defenses with cutting-edge anti-air technology. "Flak's active, Ethan. Heavy density. We're painted," Samuel yelled. Ethan instinctively wrenched the stick, initiating a violent high-G turn, forcing the aircraft perpendicular to the mountain face. Below them, the serene silence was shattered by the distinct, terrifying blossoms of light, exploding shells that tracked their trajectory with unnerving precision. Oberleutnant Franz Hessler, the commander of the Mountain Flak unit, later wrote in his journal about the encounter, "We tracked the Echo small and fast, too fast. It moved like a bird, not a machine. When we fired, it turned impossibly quick. We did not hit it, but the suddenness of its appearance, it was a phantom. We had never seen a plane move with such arrogance at that height." The brothers, however, were not arrogant. They were terrified. The near misses rocked the Ghostbird violently, the impact of the air pressure waves feeling like a massive, invisible fist slamming into the fuselage. The complex camera equipment shuddered dangerously. Camera check, Sammy. Did we get the shot? Ethan's voice was strained, laboring under the G-forces of the evasive turn. Negative on the vertical. Too much vibration. We need to go back for a cleaner shot, damn it, Samuel insisted, the necessity of the mission overriding the instinct for self-preservation. They had traveled thousands of miles and risked death multiple times for a single crucial piece of information. To fail now with the target visible was unthinkable. The decision was pure, calculated recklessness. Ethan banked the Ghostbird hard, utilizing the aircraft's incredible rate of climb to put distance between them and the immediate danger, then performed a tight, descending turn to reapproach the target from a different, less expected vector, directly over the sheer cliff face. He pushed the engines again, crossing the mountain at a near supersonic speed, flying so low relative to the mountain peaks that the turbulence was violent, buffeting the fragile aluminum skin. This time Samuel hit the sequence perfectly, the camera's word capturing the essential detail: the complex overlapping concrete blast doors, the ventilation shafts disguised as natural rock formations, and, most critically, the massive articulated radar dishes designed for extreme high-frequency detection. This daring second pass confirmed the Allied High Command's worst fears. The Germans had constructed an impenetrable, high-altitude surveillance network. This network could detect the inbound bomber streams long before they reached the industrial heart of the Reich, giving the Luftwaffe the crucial minutes needed to scramble their reserve forces. But the success came at a cost. The repeated high-G maneuvering had overstressed one of the engines. A warning light flashed red in Ethan's panel, a critical drop in oil pressure in the port engine. "Port engine failing, Sammy. We lost oil pressure. We're losing power fast," Ethan shouted, wrestling with the controls. The Ghostbird, a plane built for twin-engine redundancy, now leaned heavily on a single power plant. Its speed dropped precipitously, making it an easy target for any pursuing fighter. They were now deep behind enemy lines, wounded, and flying an aircraft designed solely for speed, which they no longer possessed. The quiet confidence of the Montana farm boys evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of a crippled machine over hostile territory. Their only chance was to nurse the dying engine, maintain altitude, and pray that the complex network of German air defenses did not detect their agonizingly slow retreat. The irony was bitter. They had successfully captured the images that would save Allied bomber crews, but they themselves were now facing an almost certain death, not from enemy fire, but from the brutal mechanics of gravity and engine failure. Their flight had just transformed from a daring reconnaissance mission into an epic struggle for survival. The Ghostbird limped eastward, the noise of the single functional engine screaming in protest. The port propeller stood motionless, feathered uselessly into the wind, a grim monument to their mechanical failure. The loss of one engine drastically reduced their maximum altitude and speed, making the once nimble reconnaissance plane a heavy, predictable target. Ethan, his hands cramped on the control column, fought the constant asymmetric drag. Flying the P-38 on one engine required immense physical strength and precise, minute adjustments to rudder and trim. It was like steering a runaway train with a single, overworked brake. "We're holding 25,000 feet, Sammy, but we're losing ground to the jet stream, and our range is shot," Ethan analyzed, his voice laced with fatigue. Their carefully calculated return route, which relied on maintaining high altitude for maximum efficiency, was now impossible. They would have to descend into the denser, lower airspace, the hunting grounds of the dedicated German interceptors. Meanwhile, Samuel was preoccupied with the priceless cargo in the camera bays. "The film is secured. It's safe, but we are not. We need to find a path through the valleys, Ethan. No way we can cross the main German intercept lines at this speed." The Germans, realizing the intruder was still in their airspace, were now operating with methodical efficiency. Two separate Staffeln squadrons of Focke-Wulf FW-190s, brutal, resilient fighter bombers, were scrambled from airfields in Austria and southern Germany. These were the dedicated area defense interceptors, flown by seasoned veterans, often experten with double-digit kill scores. The German Air Defense Headquarters was tracking the slow, agonizing progress of the single-engine target. They assumed it was a badly damaged heavy bomber trying to make it back to Allied lines. This assumption, rooted in standard operational intelligence, became the Vance brothers' unlikely shield. The Germans were looking for a lumbering target, not a slippery high-speed ghost. But the anonymity was short-lived. A forward Luftwaffe reconnaissance patrol, flying a Mi-410 Hornet, high-speed heavy fighter, spotted the unmistakable silhouette of the P-38 against the pale morning sky. "Contact! Enemy aircraft single-engine P-38 type, slow and wounded." The Mi-410 pilot's report crackled over the German tactical net. The hunter had finally found the prey. Ethan heard the distant chatter over his radio's guard channel, a mix of urgent German commands and static. He knew the jig was up. They were cornered deep in the heart of the Reich and running on half a machine. "Mi-410, Sammy. They're fast. They'll be on us in 3 minutes," Ethan warned. This was the moment the farm boys' unique skill set, honed on the empty plains, came into play. They understood the terrain, not as a map, but as a three-dimensional environment. In the vastness of Montana, they had learned to use every ridge, every shadow, every thermal current to their advantage when tracking game. Now they applied that intimate, intuitive knowledge to the unforgiving valleys of the Alps. "Ethan, pull us down. We need to hug the snow line." "Use the mountains as radar cover," Samuel directed, consulting his hand-drawn map of the major peaks. His strategy was audacious: ditch the altitude advantage and dive into the narrow, winding corridors of the highest mountain passes where radar signals were distorted and visual acquisition was challenging. Ethan pushed the Ghostbird into a steep, terrifying descent. The engine screamed, struggling to cope with the sudden change in air pressure and velocity. They plummeted into the valleys, the jagged granite peaks looming on either side, their wingtips passing mere yards from the sheer rock face. This was low-altitude flying at a speed only a fighter plane could achieve, an environment designed to kill any mistake instantly. The pursuing Mi-410 pilot, expecting an easy kill at medium altitude, was shocked. He hesitated to follow the P-38 into the narrow, turbulent passes. The Focke-Wulfs were still minutes away, scrambling to change their intercept trajectory. This brief hesitation, this single moment of doubt from the German pilot, was the edge the Vance brothers needed. They were running a game of aerial chess, where the landscape was the board and physics were the rules. The German pilots were trained to fight the enemy. Ethan and Samuel were trained to survive the environment. For 20 agonizing minutes, the Ghostbird weaved through the labyrinthine peaks, the twin shadows of the aircraft dancing across the snow. Ethan flew not by instruments, but by instinct, leveraging the minute changes in wind and terrain that he recognized from years of bush flying in the American West. Samuel kept a vigilant watch, shouting course corrections and alerting his brother to sudden updrafts and downslopes. The Mi-410 eventually gave up the chase, deeming the risk of collision too high for a supposedly doomed target. But the FW-190s were closing in, vectors perfectly calculated to trap the P-38 at the egress point of the valleys. Ethan knew they could not stay hidden forever. They had to make a break for the open sky and the distant, liberating horizon of the Mediterranean. The only way out was up, a brutal climb that would push the crippled engine past its breaking point. Their low-altitude evasion had saved them from the Mi-410, but it had drained their fuel reserves and consumed precious time. The final confrontation was inevitable. The mountain pass opened abruptly onto a wide, snow-covered plateau. The brothers had made their escape from the geographical trap, but they immediately ran headlong into the tactical one. 3 Focke-Wulf FW-190s, the butchers of the sky, were waiting for them, perfectly positioned at a higher altitude. They had anticipated the P-38's exit point and were poised for a classic high-speed attack dive. The FW-190s were heavily armed, fast, and flown by aggressive, confident pilots. "3 bogeys, Sammy! High 12 o'clock! They're coming in fast!" Ethan yelled, the sight of the dark, menacing German fighters filling the windscreen. The Ghostbird, flying on one engine, could neither climb nor accelerate to escape the imminent attack. They were, quite literally, sitting ducks. The German pilots, sensing the kill, opened fire, the tracers arcing towards the slow-moving P-38. Ethan executed a violent sideslip, a desperate old-school maneuver that briefly threw off the German lead, but the heavy 20mm cannon rounds flashed past the cockpit, their detonation shocking the air. They couldn't run. They couldn't turn. They had to fight, but the Ghost Bird carried no guns. The irony was crushing. They had survived the flak, the extreme altitude, and the mountain itself, only to be butchered by conventional fighters. "Ethan, we have nothing. How do we fight?" Samuel's question was raw, edged with panic. "We don't fight them, Sammy. We fight the air." Ethan's response was cryptic, born of a flash of desperate mechanical insight. The Vance brothers had spent years fixing and maintaining complex machinery, and they understood a fundamental law of fluid dynamics that most pilots disregarded. The P-38, with its unique twin-boom design, created an unusually powerful and concentrated wake turbulence at high speeds. Ethan initiated a series of near-suicidal maneuvers. Instead of fleeing, he turned towards the oncoming FW-190s, but not in a direct confrontation. He aimed the Ghost Bird to cross directly in front of the lead German fighter's trajectory, using the highest speed his remaining engine could manage. The first FW-190 pilot, Hauptmann Klaus Richter, an ace with 18 confirmed kills, was momentarily confused by the P-38's bizarre aggressive move. He prepared to fire another finishing burst. As the Ghost Bird flashed in front of him, Richter's FW-190 slammed unexpectedly into the P-38's powerful wingtip vortex, the invisible, spiraling column of air shed by the wing. Richter, caught completely unaware, felt his fighter pitch violently. The FW-190 momentarily stalled, its controls unresponsive, the powerful machine momentarily paralyzed by the unexpected turbulence of the smaller plane. "He's dipping! He's unstable!" Samuel exclaimed, watching the lead fighter stagger. Richter fought desperately to regain control, but the loss of speed and altitude was fatal. He pulled out of the attack run, unable to engage. The second FW-190, commanded by an aggressive wingman, followed immediately. Ethan repeated the impossible maneuver, pulling a tight vertical circle directly across the second fighter's path. Again, the German plane hit the violent, invisible wake, causing its pilot to momentarily lose his bearings and his target lock. The third FW-190 pilot, watching his comrade's inexplicable loss of stability, hesitated. He had seen two veteran pilots momentarily lose control of their planes. What kind of plane was this? It wasn't armed, but it was fighting back with an invisible mechanical weapon. The truth was, the Vance brothers were utilizing the wake turbulence not as a natural phenomenon, but as a calculated, engineered force. They knew the precise speed and angle required to generate the maximum, most disruptive vortex. It was a farm boy's trick, using the physics of a stubborn tractor's momentum or a powerful combine's draft to their advantage. The fear in the German cockpit was not physical but psychological. The third pilot, unsure of the P-38's weapon, pulled out of the attack. The result became a legend that stunned everyone. The mission profile was reconnaissance, but the outcome was an aerial engagement where two men in an unarmed, crippled plane had defeated three superior fighters without firing a single shot. They had used physics, not firepower. But the ordeal was far from over. The evasive maneuvers had been taxing on the single engine, and the oil pressure now dropped dangerously low. The escape was momentary, the danger absolute. They were still hundreds of miles from Allied lines, flying a dead machine towards an open sea. Their survival now depended not on trickery, but on sheer, brute force endurance and a final, desperate gamble. The FW-190s broke off their pursuit, their pilots reporting a baffling encounter with an aggressively unstable P-38 that seemed to be defended by an unknown, air-disrupting force. The High Command dismissed the report as pilot fatigue and confusion, but the fact remained. The Ghost Bird had escaped a conventional intercept. However, the psychological victory did nothing to fix the dying engine. The oil pressure gauge was nearly at zero, and the remaining engine was protesting with a grinding metallic howl that could not be ignored. "We can't maintain 20,000 feet, Sammy. The engine won't take it," Ethan stated flatly. "We're going to descend, right down to the deck. We're going to fly low and slow over the Adriatic." This decision was the final, desperate gamble. Descending to sea level meant abandoning the advantage of radar camouflage provided by the altitude and the mountains, but it offered two critical compensations. The denser air at sea level would be easier for the struggling engine to process, and the proximity to the water would, paradoxically, offer a form of stealth. The Ghost Bird dropped from the cold, rarefied air into the turbulent, damp atmosphere above the sea. They were now flying at just 50 feet above the wave tops, a terrifying altitude known as on the deck. The air was thick with spray, and the plane bucked and swayed with the unpredictable surface wind. At this altitude, the risk of a simple control input mistake leading to a catastrophic splashdown was extreme. The horizon vanished in the haze, replaced by the hypnotic, dangerous proximity of the water. This was where the brothers' Montana routes proved invaluable once more. They had flown countless hours low over the flat plains and rolling hills, navigating by instinct and landmark rather than instruments. They knew how to read the landscape, even if the landscape was now a moving, liquid enemy. "Keep a constant speed, Ethan. Don't touch the trim. We need to stay in the ground effect," Samuel instructed. He was referring to the aerodynamic phenomenon where an aircraft flying very close to the surface experiences reduced drag and increased lift, an unintended bonus of low flight. For 2 agonizing hours, they skimmed the waves, the plane's shadow racing beneath them like a dark omen. They were now in the most dangerous territory of all, the transition zone between German aerial supremacy and the reach of the distant Allied escort fighters. Their primary threat was now the Kriegsmarine, German Navy, and the coastal patrol units. The Germans had deployed high-speed E-boats, motor torpedo boats, and heavily armed patrol cutters designed to intercept Allied aircraft that had been forced down or were flying low for bombing runs. Just as the sun began to climb over the eastern horizon, illuminating the water in a blinding sheet of silver, Samuel spotted them. 2 German patrol boats, cutting a fast wake toward the south, clearly on alert. "Boats, 10 o'clock. They've seen us, Ethan. They're turning." The patrol boats opened fire with their light anti-aircraft cannons, a terrifying chatter of machine gun fire. The tracers seemed to rise slowly from the boats, then accelerate towards the Ghost Bird. Ethan pushed the engine for a final desperate burst of speed. The ailing engine responded with a deep, sickening clunk, then began to overheat rapidly. "We can't outrun them at this altitude. We'll burn the engine," Ethan shouted over the roar. Thinking rapidly, Samuel pointed to a small, uninhabited rocky island barely visible on the horizon. "Island, Ethan. Fly towards it. Use the shadow." The move was counterintuitive. Fly towards land, sacrificing the low-level stealth of the sea. But Samuel had realized something crucial. The patrol boat's anti-aircraft guns were designed for straight-line attack. The high-speed turn required to engage a target circling a small, sudden landmass would momentarily reduce their speed and accuracy. Ethan swerved, flying the crippled P-38 directly towards the sheer, rocky cliff face of the island. He flew the plane into a terrifying tight circle around the small peak. The patrol boats, unable to quickly match the maneuver, were momentarily forced to fire at the high, rocky terrain. The diversion worked. For precious minutes, the German gunners were disoriented by the P-38's impossible agility around the tight circle. The brothers were not fighting the boats, but the boat's capacity to track them accurately. The delay, however small, was sufficient. As the German patrol boats finally stabilized and prepared to deliver a decisive burst, the distinct, welcome sound of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines cut through the air. 6 North American P-51 Mustangs, the angels of the sky, appeared suddenly on the horizon, their silver paint flashing in the morning sun. The Allied Air Patrol, alerted to an emergency in the area, had arrived. The Mustangs immediately engaged the German patrol boats, their machine guns spitting fire, forcing the boats to scatter and focus on self-defense. The Ghost Bird, exhausted and hemorrhaging oil, was saved. Ethan throttled back the barely functional engine, allowing the Mustangs to escort them toward the safety of the Italian coast. The improbable evasion was complete. They had delivered the film. The P-38 Ghost Bird, its aluminum skin scarred by shrapnel and its engine mortally wounded, finally touched down at its home base in Italy. The landing was rough, the plane shuddering to a halt. The brothers emerged from the cockpit, physically and emotionally drained, greeted not by cheers but by a handful of stunned intelligence officers. The immediate focus was the film. Samuel rushed the canisters into the developing lab. The analysis began instantly, a team of analysts poring over the high-resolution images. The results were immediate and devastating. The images confirmed the existence of 4 major high-altitude radar and jet prototype facilities in the Alps. The detail was so granular, showing ventilation shafts and power cable lines, that Allied engineers could accurately map the internal structures. The sheer quality of the intelligence was unprecedented. It was the key to unlocking the entire German high-altitude defense strategy. The data allowed Allied planners to bypass the strongest points of the Alpine line entirely, saving hundreds of bombers and potentially thousands of airmen during the subsequent offensives. The two farm brothers, in a single desperate flight, had accomplished what entire strategic bombing campaigns had failed to do. They had neutralized the enemy's element of surprise. The official report, written by the Chief of Intelligence, concluded, "The success of Operation Ghostbird was not attributable to superior technology, but to a terrifying blend of technical mastery, improvisation, and an utter disregard for conventional limitations. The pilots flew the machine past the point of mechanical possibility." The irony of the title of this story, "They sent two farm brothers against 120 Japanese," was not literal, but a distillation of the scale of the risk. They weren't fighting 120 men. They were fighting an entire layered defense system. The flak, the fighters, the radar, the terrain, that required the equivalent effort of 120 dedicated soldiers to overcome. Their unexpected success, their defeat of superior numbers and technology using pure physics and grit, instantly became a legend within the shadowy world of Allied intelligence. Ethan and Samuel Vance, the two farm boys from Montana, were immediately pulled from combat duty. Their unique skills were too valuable, and their knowledge of the Ghostbird secrets too sensitive to be risked again. They received decorations, of course, but their most enduring legacy was their anonymity. The nature of their success was so disruptive, so based on unorthodox methods, that the mission was classified at the highest level and buried in the archives. Their improbable victory over the German air defense became a story told only in whispers among the highest echelons. They returned to Montana and to the quiet rhythm of the seasons. They never spoke publicly of the P-38 or the terror of the single-engine flight over the Alps. They returned to the simple, honest danger of the land, forever changed by the experience of seeing the world from the edge of the stratosphere. The ultimate significance of the Ghostbird mission lies in the profound historical truth it reveals, that the outcome of a mechanized industrial war often pivots not on the grand designs of generals, but on the quiet, intuitive brilliance of a few individuals. The two brothers, trained to fix engines and read the sky, proved that ingenuity, fueled by sheer will, could defeat the most complex military technology the enemy could deploy. Their flight was not just a reconnaissance mission. It was a testament to the enduring power of human adaptation in the face of impossible odds. The secrets of the German Alps were exposed, the integrity of the Reich's defense was shattered, and the eventual path to victory was cleared. All by a plane without guns, piloted by two men who understood machines and the sky better than they understood military doctrine. This incredible true story is just one example of the secret technological and human dramas that defined the Second World War. If you want to continue exploring the hidden histories, the technological marvels, and the extraordinary human experiences that change the world, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button and share this story. Your support ensures we can keep bringing these powerful cinematic histories out of the shadows.